So we're here with Daniel Estulin, best-selling author in Guadalajara, Mexico, right before the big conference he's going to give. How are you doing, Daniel?
I'm doing very well. It's great to be here. It's my first trip, and I'm loving every minute of it.
And I got a few questions for him, and the first has to do with his new book, Fuera de Control. Is it in English yet?
No, not yet. We published it in Spain in October, on October 6th, and it's been number one in Spain for the past 3.5 months. Obviously helped greatly by this unfortunate terrorist situation in Paris on the 13th of November, which, needless to say, I predicted long before I wrote my book. And the book is coming out in several countries, amongst them Serbia and Croatia, in the next 2 or 3 months. And if all goes well, it'll be out in the United States by about mid-May.
And tell us about the main thesis of the book. You know, we hear on the news a lot, ISIS this, ISIS that, these crazy radical Muslims running around creating havoc. But what's really going on?
What's really going on is just another form of conquest, and that's what really globalization is all about. And terrorism, it has always been an arm of an extension of the powers that be it the British Empire, or be it the United States, or be it both of them working together with other powers, the superpowers, to achieve a particular objective. And we could see it going back all the way to the 1980s when you had the Taliban fighting the Soviets. That operation was financed via BCCI out of Dubai, and today's operations against terrorists or would-be terrorists are financed by other great institutions such as Hong Kong Shanghai Banking Institution, and also UBS out of Switzerland. And one of the things that I talk about in the book, and that's something that unfortunately is very true, is that Brad Bilderberg discovered. He's a whistleblower who worked as an analyst for UBS. He discovered 19,000 bank accounts with billions of dollars in these accounts, which were used to finance international terrorism. And needless to say, people have to understand that terrorists such as ISIS or any of these other groups in the Middle East, they don't finance themselves strictly via stealing somebody else's oil, but it's an international operation. And the reason why you can't seem to get rid of these people is because, again, they're financed, created, and armed by the same people who are supposed to be fighting for freedom and democracy, such as the United States, Great Britain, etc.
Yeah, and it's funny because a lot of people know the history you just mentioned in the 1980s. With under President Carter's directive in 1979, we funded the Mujahideen, which became Al-Qaeda. But it's just interesting that there seems to be this disconnect where today they're like the West supporting ISIS. No, but I mean it happened before.
It has always been this way. We can talk about the international drug trade. The same people who run that as they run terrorist operations in the world stage, and it's divide and conquer. It's all of these systems that you're seeing are just being tested on many different levels, and terrorism is just one of the ways that these systems are being tested. And I think if you kind of go back and look at what happened in the late 1980s when the whole the phraseology of war and terror was created, and it was created right just about the time that the West knew that shortly, and that happened in 1991, Islam would overtake Christianity as the number one religion in the world. And obviously, if you're the Vatican, which is part of the central banking warfare model, which has been in operations for the past 500 years, I mean, you couldn't possibly accept that, and which is again one of the reasons a lot of people think the Vatican is this epicenter for goodness, and we'll forget about pedophilia scandals and the billions of dollars that they had to this very unholy institution had to pay out to children around the world. But it's the fact that they've been in a business of making money for about 2,000 years or so, and all this other stuff about saving souls and God, and it's like secondary and tertiary operations, like any other entity. It has multiple business objectives. And so when Islam overtook Christianity as the number one religion, the whole point of this war on terror was to get Islam into a model, and via U.S. jurisdiction in the Middle East, this is exactly what has been done. And you see right now the Islamic terrorism, be it ISIS variety, these other groups, multiple groups in Libya and Syria and so on and so forth. It's just an extension of the same operation.
And another best-selling author, this really good, William Engdahl, he wrote an article recently about Syria and World War III. There's a lot of people going around saying Syria is the beginning of World War III, and I think he came out and said he didn't think so. And you mentioned earlier in your talk that the U.S. started this in Syria and will now move on to the pivot to Asia. Do you think, all this talk of World War III, do you think we're seeing the start of something like that?
I think, if you kind of look at the world, from bird's eye view, it's any of these operations we're seeing right now, again against the background of this economic breakdown we're seeing all around the world, and this changing of economic model, which has been based again for the last 500 years on central banking warfare model, and that's basically moving everything into space. That's going to be a space-based technologies, economy, and so on and so forth. So these changes we're seeing right now are creating conditions around the world, both economic conditions and conditions of control, or lack of it, that any one of them could lead to third world, except that it's not going to be just third world war. It's going to be third world thermonuclear war, which probably going to put an end to humanity as we know it, and I just hope it doesn't happen. I don't know if Syria is the beginning of the end game, but what we've seen, with this dialectic of control, as I call it, is, after Afghanistan we had Iraq, after Iraq we had Libya, after Libya now we have Syria, and the Russians moved in, and they changed their dynamics somewhat, and so all this talk about getting rid of Assad and replacing him with some Western stooge, that's been taken off the table, and as you mentioned in your question, Americans, they're now pivoting to Asia, into this all these infrastructure projects, which are going to be a big part of the near future. And just today, Putin announced that he's taking his troops out, and I need to analyze that a little bit more to understand exactly in what context. But I think there's just so much going on the world stage, and one of the reasons I think that we might be looking at what's going on with Putin is that Putin is not an independent entity. He's supported right now by London, and there is no way around it. There's no country can go off independently on its own, and we're seeing this, very interlocked, globalized world, trying to survive this insanity one way or another, and only God knows how it's all going to end up.
And your best-selling book, you wrote a decade ago, I believe, on Bilderberg. But who is the new club, Bilderberg? You say often they're not as powerful as they once were. Has it gone from a few small forums and groups to a huge number of groups? Who's the new club, Bilderberg?
I don't think there is a new Bilderberg. I think Bilderberg was never an entity that you could consider to be, as a lot of people have done over the years, mistakenly calling it the LCNI, the people who run the world. They never ran the world. And the whole idea behind Bilderberg, the creation of Bilderberg, was you got to look at the people who put it together, both on the American side and also on the Western European side. People such as Prince Bernhard, Walter Hallstein, who are directly, linked to the Nazis. On the American side, the Rockefellers, the Bushes, the Harrimans, the Dulleses, all those people, one way or another, or had dealings with the Nazis and made money off the Nazis or for the Nazis, or laundered somebody else's money to cover their links to the Nazis. So the whole thing behind Bilderberg, when it was created in 1954, was first of all to hide all this Nazi loot, which they had successfully in South America. And then in 54, the same year that Bilderberg was created, you had this German miracle, which Renaissance, which wasn't of course a German miracle. It was just simply that the people behind Bilderberg brought all that money back to Europe, and that certainly went a long way to putting Germany back on its feet. And as far as all these groups, they've always been around. We could talk about, it's again, if you're talking about Bilderberg, the Trilateral Commission Council on Foreign Relations, the Nice Circle, foundations, think tanks being Hudson, Hoover, Ford Foundation, Rockefeller, MacArthur. It's unlimited number of these groups, think tanks, foundations. They all work together. They're kind of like concentric circles, and they all work on the principle of consensus. And so the whole idea is that you don't have like this, this one guy. It's like we think of pyramidal structure. It's not really like that. It's more like, a consensus laterally, like think of a Rubik's Cube mixed with other Rubik's Cubes and all kind of working together. So it's that kind of a principle, and they're all working together towards this consensus of control, which has been ongoing, for hundreds of years. That hasn't changed, except right now we're living in a period with, diminishing natural resources. You talk about, lack of water, lack of food, natural resources, and so on and so forth. Not so much population or space-wise, because you can take 7 billion people, whatever it is that we are, and you can all put them in, the state of Texas, or certainly you can fit them into Mexico. I mean, you're not going to be comfortable, but I'm just saying there's enough space for a lot of people. What there isn't enough on this, closed system, which is a planet Earth, is food, water, and natural resources. And that's one of the reasons why, the model is being changed. And so everything else that's going on in the world, you kind of have to understand it in this context, that while they're changing the model, destroying the world's economy on purpose, they're creating a new model which is based on space-based economy, using smartphone technology as the mechanism, and then obviously talking about cashless society or digital currency, which is, you have one of the reasons that you have everyone talking right now about eliminating $100 bills, 500 euro notes, 1,000 francs, Swiss franc notes, and so on, and obviously taking interest rates to below zero to negative levels, and that's all part of the system, going from society with cash to Bitcoin, which is an intermediary point, and then going to society digital currency, which is just the optimum form of control. And against this backdrop, all this other stuff is going on the world stage. And I think this is probably the best way to understand all these different events in context.
And you mentioned population and resources, and what's your opinion on the global warming agenda, or climate change, as they call it? Recently it snowed here in Mexico, which is pretty rare, and people were freaking out. And global warming, it's so hot that it's snowing. I mean, what are your thoughts?
We should ask Al Gore, see what he thinks about this. But it's like we're actually right now in the period, in this 100,000 year cycle, of which we're like just about the middle of it, of global cooling. So it's like, if anything, it's like global cooling, and you kind of can see it around the world. They're trying to push the other agenda forward. And when you are talking about renewable energies being, windmills, which kind of takes you back to Middle Ages and Don Quixote de la Mancha, or we're talking about sun. You could never generate enough energy for space exploration, for serious progress and the technological development. And that's one of the reasons why the elite circles, when you're talking about all these, in international meetings, they're trying to push on these countries to get rid of nuclear technology, to get rid of technologies that have a much greater potential, and replace them with with wind or sun-based, and they're going to give you all the money you want. They'll shower you with cash, and in the end, the only reason they're doing this is because, again, they understand that progress and development of society is directly proportional to population density, and you can only have that if you have the technological potential, and to have that you need energy sources which could actually take you in that direction. That's one of the reasons you have this. And then also there's another part. When you're talking about sun or wind power, you need lots of land to do that, and most of the land, especially in Europe, is owned by your old aristocracy. So when you're looking at all the monies being thrown out by European Union, which if I'm not mistaken, it was like $365 million last year. Most of that money goes to the same rich people, wealthy elite, and that these are the taxes that we pay. So they take money from us. They replace useful energy with things which don't really make any sense, and then they give all these hundreds of millions of dollars to the same people who run the world from behind the scenes. It's a perfect scam. Yeah. They're just so good at these scams. You know what I mean? Any scam you look at it, they figured out the best way to get their money out.
Just two more questions. What are your thoughts on the new media revolution? Like a lot of the old systems of dissemination, the CNN, radio, they're dying, and we have all these new podcasts, new channels like Russia Today. Who can we trust? I know we need to think for ourselves and do our own research at the end of the day, but what are your thoughts on this new media revolution? How long will it last? Who's out there that's good that people can listen to?
It's you mentioned Russia Today. You have a Press TV. You have Al Mayadeen. You have Telesur in South America, which is a majority owned by Venezuela. But a lot of these things, when you kind of think about it, is like no media, no journalist is free to go off and tell their side of the story, because they're always working for someone else. And I don't care what you're working for, whether you're working for RT, for Telesur, or New York Times, or CNN. Nobody can tell a story, the way they always represent an angle or a version of the bigger media. That said, I think what's happening right now, if you kind of look at the technology, such as smartphone technology, that's changing completely the way the business of news reporting is done. It's if you kind of go to the idea of citizen journalist, and this is a perfect example of what the citizen journalist is becoming today. And the mainstream media they haven't quite figured out exactly how they can get most of the people who use these technologies, into a system and into a model, because again, you're looking at two different generations of people. One which is, analogical, which is us, and then you have the younger generation, which is digital generation. And these people, it's all tech, and it's all, really high speed, and it's a short attention span, very little loyalty base, and they change their points of view, change their alliances, and but also at the same time, if you kind of look at where most of these smartphone technology is based, it's based in Asia, India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Indonesia, and so when you kind of so you kind of look at these countries, they don't have any, running water, toilet paper, but they all have a smartphone. Do you know what I mean? And it's changing completely the way the business of reporting is being done today, and I think. The elitists haven't quite figured out exactly how to get this generation of people into. One of the reasons I haven't figured it out, because if you kind of look at the people themselves, anyone who's over 55, is kind of used to unipolar world, and the world is no longer that. And when you kind of look at all these different groups of people out there, and groups could be as small as 3 people, it's very, very difficult to create this game theory based on cybernetics, which could actually predict the behavior of such small groups of people on the world stage. And so there's a lot of stuff going on, and this is just another of the areas where a lot of this stuff creates this uncertainty, and at the same time gives us an opportunity to get our point of view out. And that's where the whole concept of citizen journalists comes in very, very effectively.
And finally, what is the most pressing issue on Daniel Estulin's mind currently?
Let me see. Have my Bilderberg documentary is done, so we're in the process of getting that out and bringing it into the public, and that's been in the works for the last 4 years. Also, Out of Control, or Fuera de Control, as it's called in Spanish. The idea is to get that published as quickly as possible, because it reveals a lot of stuff which the mainstream press in the United States certainly would like to keep covered, such as, for example, Hillary Clinton's role in the cover-up, needless to say, behind both assassinations of Gaddafi and the assassination of U.S. Ambassador in Benghazi, Christopher Stevens, and 3 U.S. aides, and they've done everything they possibly could to change our perception of reality by making a Hollywood film out of it, 13 hours, and also giving this big brouhaha for all to see via CNN and every other mainstream channel of Hillary Clinton being quizzed by bad Republicans on the world stage, and the famous picture of Hillary Clinton resting on the palm of her hand saying, "Oh, I'm so bored and tired." And the whole thing is just basically, it's being used as a vaccine. So anytime anytime from now on somebody brings up Benghazi, you immediately want to just say, "Oh, please, we've had enough." So idea is to get the book out, the film out there, and a lot of things are being done, a lot of exciting stuff, and I think this is just a really, really. We are living in interesting times, and I couldn't say it any other way. And there's just so much uncertainty, but uncertainty also gives you a possibility, to within this realm of uncertainty, to create something and put it out there for all to see.
Okay, well, thank you from Mexico, Daniel.
Thank you so much for the invitation, and again, here we are in Guadalajara. It's a great place, and it's wonderful to be here.